All right. We're going to go ahead and get started with our next reader. So Rebecca Rusch is an ultra-endurance pro athlete, world champion, author, entrepreneur, Emmy winner. Thank you. Emmy winner and motivational speaker. She is a resident of Ketchum and the author of Rusch to Glory, which she will be reading from. Welcome, Rebecca.
Hi, everyone, and thanks to the library. This is amazing. And having to follow Scott Glenn, okay, and Mats Wielander, and it continues to impress me what goes on in our community and the special place that this is. And I probably, too, will be one of the people who has admitted that I've cried at LitWalk here. So anybody else, that poem, those poems, amazing. So what I'm going to read from you is from my book, Rusch to Glory, which is one of the hardest things I've ever done, writing a book. I'll admit to you, I've never read my book. After it was done, I put it away. So this is a really exciting experience to read it once again and revisit it. And the story that I chose is about finding Idaho and being part of this really special community. So it seems to kind of fit in with the lineup that the library has gotten together. It's really amazing. So I'm happy to be here. And yeah, I don't typically read my words like Scott said about his. So here we go, from Rusch to Glory. Early in my career, I embraced the uncertainty of a nomadic life. When I was living out of my car, I had a home is where the heart is magnet from my mom stuck proudly on my dashboard. It was a vaguely reassuring sentiment when I was a nomad, but as the years went on, I was eager to seek out stability and find a place where I could always return. In the past few years, I fell in love with Ketchum and settled down. I had found home. I've dug in deeper here than I ever imagined. Greg and I were looking at purchasing a house to have more space and build a permanent life together. As I signed the mortgage papers for our house, my hand was sweaty and shaking. My entire life, all I had wanted was freedom, from commitment, from bills, from any strings that threatened to tie me down. When I sold my Bronco, which was my home a few years earlier, I cried as I watched the new owners drive her away. That truck was a symbol of my independence, my freedom, and I worried that my days of adventure were coming to an end. But then I realized the adventures weren't over. Now they would just start from a fixed address. When it came time for Greg and me to move into our house, all those special things I had gathered from around the world in my travels, they suddenly found a home too. There were masks from Fiji, a machete from Borneo, mate cups from Argentina, prayer flags from Tibet, carpets from Kyrgyzstan, and hundreds of other items that I gathered and carried with me en route to Idaho. I'm still away from home more than half the time, living out of a suitcase and taking part in these intense experiences. The schedule's nonstop, often taking me to far-flung places. Sometimes I'm treated like a rock star. People ask for photos, autographs, interviews. But when I step off the plane in Idaho, the mountain air is cleansing and I'm grounded. Most surprisingly, as a new homeowner to me, is that I've become a homebody, embracing the comfortable tasks that accompany what would be called a normal life. Despite having a black thumb, digging in my garden is therapeutic. There were many, many meals of canned tuna and ramen noodles when I was living out of my car and hunting down paychecks. Now that I have an actual kitchen, I make bread and have someone to cook for. I always joke that when I had a garage, I'll know I've really made it. So now I have one with a place for all my bikes, tools, skis, and my motorcycle, and it's my favorite room in the house. Outside of being able to buy a home in Ketchum and make a living here, I've been able to take part in building a community. Getting involved with the local fire department, hosting my own event in Idaho, have helped me ground and pave a path to the future for myself and my own community where I belong. I sit in city council meetings, take part on advisory boards, and offer my opinion when asked of local business owners and policymakers. It's gratifying to be able to give back to the community that welcomed me with open arms. And as a professional racer, I ride in some of the most sublime places on the planet. It's a privilege to do this as my job, but honestly, there's no place I would rather be than nestled in the mountains in my own backyard. For so many people, Idaho is a state to fly over or pass through on their way to another, more well-marked destination. When I tell people where I'm from, they often look at me with blank stares. Sometimes they pause and ask, Iowa? Everyone seems to associate Idaho with potatoes, but it's also a land of jagged mountains, wildflowers blooming as far as the eye can see. There are endless miles of single track and distant dirt roads leading to ancient glacial basins, the type of high country that epitomizes the Western landscape. Best of all, you don't have to share it with hordes of tourists or thrill seekers. The anonymity of this corner of the world is one of its greatest traits. So instead of trying to describe Idaho to people I meet in my travels, in 2013, I created my own destination ride, Rebecca's Private Idaho, so I could simply bring people here and show them firsthand why it's heaven on earth. The idea sprouted after taking part in a couple of unlikely events. First of which I only agreed to out of obligation from a sponsor. The Dirty Kansas 200, as the name suggests, is a 200-mile gravel road race through the Flint Hills of Kansas. With 12 hours being the fastest time and not a mountain or a single track trail in sight, I was convinced that this event would represent death by boredom. I loaded up my iPod with the best playlist I had in hopes of staying awake and somewhat motivated without the usual external stimulus. I was wrong about gravel riding. The thousands of other people who lined up every year obviously felt the same way. It was a superb event, and those little shards of stone added a challenge and interesting aspect to the ride. After my first gravel road event, I was convinced that gravel is the great equalizer for roadies and mountain bikers alike. It's a middle ground that's technical, challenging, and exhilarating, no matter what kind of bike you choose to ride. After my maiden gravel voyage, I realized gravel road riding was also the ticket to get more people on their bikes and showcase the maximum amount of stellar terrain. Since there is more gravel than pavement around Ketchum, this format was a no-brainer. The other event that inspired me was Levi's Grand Fondo. This is another popular ride that draws cyclists to Santa Rosa, California, by the thousands for a massive ride that somehow retains the feel of a small-town community event despite the numbers. I wanted my event to include the best of Dirty Kansas and Grand Fondo, miles of gravel still traversing Idaho's remote terrain with Ketchum's hometown vibe, and Rebecca's Private Idaho was born. I began the laborious process of building a brand, gathering partners, and rallying a mountain of volunteers and local business support. My goal was simple: to ride with cyclists on my very own training ground, putting on display what I see every day from my front porch. I also wanted to use my reach as a professional athlete to support cycling in a more meaningful way. I've never had much disposable income to donate to worthy causes, but I do have a public name and an image that I can use to bring support to the causes I believe in. With the idea formulated in my head and friends and sponsors literally holding my hand, I announced the event to the public and held my breath to see if anyone would actually come. A great idea does not necessarily mean a great event. Hosting an event for hundreds of people with my name attached to it was both all-consuming and terrifying. If I failed, it would be a very public and expensive flop. Like anything I've ever done, I was not alone, and I didn't want to disappoint people. This idea wouldn't have taken off if it weren't for some key personal and industry friends who gave me a collective push in the butt to go for it. Heading into the event, I endured the most challenging 2 months of my life to date. I was still reeling from the heavily emotional blow of my friend Bonnie's death. On top of this, the risk and workload involved with launching a new event was grinding me down. And then there was the fact that I just purchased my first home. Never mind the financial stress of committing to the biggest purchase of my life. It was the sawdust and disruption of moving and remodeling that really wore on me. Greg and I were gutting the place with our own bare hands. And for a month, I didn't have a moment to ride a bike, but at least all of the moving demolition was giving me a great strength workout. I was juggling like never before, but there were 250 riders registered for Private Idaho, and the pieces were coming into place. Then, just 16 days out from the race, lightning struck near Ketchum, beginning a horrific domino effect that would lead to the biggest forest fire in the Rocky Mountains that year. I was in Canada at the time when I heard the news. The fire was moving to Ketchum and mandatory evacuations were underway. Just 24 hours and a few $100s later in change fees, I was on my way home to go work for the Ketchum Fire Department. By the time I got there, the blaze was completely overwhelming the Wood River Valley. The airport and most local businesses were closed, and the air was heavy with smoke. Nearly all of the residents were being evacuated. In their place, an operational camp city had sprung up with 2,000 firefighters, hundreds of rigs, and a complete command structure to deal with a 126,000-acre fire. I headed into the black cloud, the sole vehicle driving north in a sea of people fleeing the scene. The next 5 days were spent working 17-hour shifts on structure protection and watching the skies turn orange. My event director and course director are also members of the Ketchum Fire Department, so all work on Private Idaho came to a screeching halt during our fire. Our singular focus was protecting our community as the fire was quickly upgraded to a Type 1, the highest level incident. The stress of my dream being crushed and my hometown in turmoil was overwhelming, without even considering my professional and personal responsibilities. I was near the limit of my endurance. 10 days from the event, I had to decide whether or not the event would go on. I jumped rank, going directly to the operations branch director on the fire, Captain John Kennedy from the Reno Fire Department. He happened to be an avid cyclist, and he'd heard I lived here and was on scene. He was more than willing to consult with me on this hard decision. We pored over maps to make educated guesses on fire, smoke movement, and containment. Captain Kennedy also consulted with the head meteorologist. His input was somewhat reassuring, but there were no guarantees. We were trying to predict how a fire would behave. By now, the blaze had burned over 100,000 acres and was only 20% contained. I made the risky decision to host the event as planned, thinking the fire might be brought under control just in the nick of time. Incredibly, it was. And over the next few days, the fire containment numbers continued to grow and crews slowly went home. The tide had turned and the air was clearing. Ketchum came back to life, and Rebecca's Private Idaho was a much-needed celebration for a community back from the brink. As RPI visitors rolled into town, thank you firefighter signs could be seen in windows of local businesses and all throughout residential neighborhoods. The sense of relief and joy among the locals returning home was palpable. There were street parties, and nearly every day with firefighters treated as honorary guests. I proudly wore my Ketchum Fire Department t-shirt, not just for the free beer, but out of pride for being able to do my small part to protect my community. As the riders arrived for the event, community leaders and shop owners thanked me for bringing tourists back to town following the biggest losses they had endured during this peak season. On September 1, 2013, my dream became a reality. Standing at the start line, the sky was smoke-free, and a banner with my name on it in bold letters stretched overhead my hometown. This brought tears to my eyes. People came, sponsors rallied, and everyone pitched in. Riders were smiling and ready to roll 100 miles through my beloved training ground. I felt light as a feather, and our announcer called out on the race, 3, 2, 1, giddy up. I crossed a personal finish line at that start line and settled in for what would be my favorite ride of the year and one of my biggest accomplishments. I took my place in the middle of the peloton, flanked by my former coach, sponsors, friends. I couldn't wipe the smile from my face. I rode with different people all day, chatting, fixing flats, taking photos, offering motivation, and socializing, and eventually rolling across the finish line in the middle of the pack. It was the best ride I've ever done. I have high hopes that this event will become my legacy. I want even more people to know about the scenery, the hospitality, and the sheer perfection that my Idaho home offers to cyclists. More than that, though, after so many years living as a nomad and laying my head down in so many different towns, Ketchum welcomed me with open arms. I knew I was home the first week I arrived. There was no pretense, no cliques, just small-town hospitality and jaw-droppingly beautiful terrain. This was my way of hugging Ketchum back. When the riders come to Rebecca's Private Idaho, I want them to feel like they're Idaho locals, even if just for a few days. That this connection takes place from the seat of a bicycle is just convenience. It's the vehicle we all share that helps us reach a better understanding of what's important in the world around us, people and place. Thanks. Sorry, I cried at LitWalk.